Montecito, the 10th of December, 2025. What began as a routine day of protocol at the Royal Secretariat in Clarence House took a stunning turn that no aide could have predicted. The silence of the palace corridors was shattered when officials confirmed the receipt of a formal legal document, bearing the signature of Meghan Markle and addressed directly to His Majesty, King Charles III. It was not a Christmas card. It was not a family olive branch. It was an invoice. The document, stamped with the red seal of the prestigious Markle and Roth LLP, did not carry the tone of a daughter-in-law writing to a father. It was cold, transactional, and reeking of commerce. According to a senior royal source who spoke on condition of anonymity, the contents left palace officials aghast. In this 12-page dossier, Meghan Markle outlined a terrifyingly detailed financial and educational roadmap for her two children, Prince Archie Harrison and Princess Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor. The headline figure was enough to make anyone's jaw drop. A combined financial demand totaling $12.8 million. Meghan argued that this exorbitant sum was necessary to cover private tuition from ages 4 to 18 at elite U.S. institutions possessing what she termed royal-compatible values. But that was just the beginning. This invoice dissected parenting into a cold Excel spreadsheet. Meghan itemized costs for annual international travel to maintain a connection to the UK, specialized tutors for royal protocol, international diplomacy, and languages. Most notably, there was a demand for a 24/7 armed security team for both children during school hours and public engagements. Let's look deeper at the numbers investigative journalists from the London Herald uncovered from this leak. Meghan broke it down line by line. £48,000 a year for Lilibet's projected enrollment at Marlborough-inspired private academies in California. £56,000 a year for Archie's projected middle and upper school fees at prestigious institutions like Brentwood or Harvard-Westlake, and $1.2 million over 14 years for royal equivalent cultural immersion programs. The largest line item? A staggering £2.3 million earmarked for security staffing, with a note explicitly demanding standards equivalent to Scotland Yard's former Royal Protection Unit. However, what disturbed Buckingham Palace far more than the exorbitant figures was the accompanying appendix. Meghan included a full financial audit of the children's current educational progress, including the names of current teachers, psychological development notes, and even health-related disclosures. She attached screenshots of school applications and tuition payment histories. In the eyes of royal observers, this was doxing her own children. For many within the royal circle, this crossed a moral red line. Meghan had exposed Lilibet and Archie in a way no royal parent has ever done, not even the late Princess Diana, in her most desperate moments. One senior aide remarked bitterly, "Security is not just about guards, it is about privacy." In the cover letter, Meghan's legal team cleverly, or rather brazenly, referenced King Charles's decision not to revoke the prince and princess titles bestowed upon Archie and Lilibet in March 2023. The letter's argument was clear. If the children retain the titles, the Crown must assume a proportional role in ensuring their upbringing reflects the dignity of those titles, even if they reside abroad. She cited historical examples, such as Prince Philip's international schooling or King Charles's time in Australia, to justify that location should not exclude support. Yet, as insiders pointed out, those examples were rooted in royal service, not private separation. Meghan was attempting to blur the line between duty and entitlement, turning royal legacy into a service package that could be bought, sold, and reimbursed. This letter was not just a financial request. It was a declaration of war. It placed King Charles in an impossible dilemma: pay up to buy silence and dignity for his grandchildren, or refuse and face a new media storm about discrimination. But Meghan forgot one thing. The king is not the only one holding the keys to the palace. There is another woman watching these moves, and she does not have a habit of negotiating with terrorists of protocol. If Meghan Markle expected a negotiation, she misunderstood the nature of the woman standing at the king's right hand. Within 48 hours of the invoice arriving, the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace shifted from shock to cold, hard steel. while King Charles maintained a regal distance, choosing not to dignify the demand with a direct personal reply. It was Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, who stepped forward to draft the response. And she did not mince words. An internal directive was immediately issued, signed by King Charles III, but bearing the unmistakable fingerprints of his sister in her role as President of the Royal Governance Council. The statement, shared only with senior royals and government liaisons, read like a legal verdict. There exists no obligation, moral, financial, or institutional, for the Crown to subsidize the upbringing of children whose guardians have voluntarily stepped outside the responsibilities, duties, and expectations of royal life. In plain English, you cannot quit the job and keep the company credit card. The choice to walk away in 2020 still carries consequences, and those consequences are now being felt in Montecito. But the real counterstrike happened behind closed doors. On December 3rd, during a private strategic meeting at Sandringham, Princess Anne addressed a select group of Commonwealth educators and royal advisors. According to insiders present in the room, the Princess Royal didn't just speak. She dismantled the Sussexes' entire argument. Standing before the fireplace, holding nothing but a small, worn leather notebook, Anne delivered a measured but devastating rebuke. Her voice, usually calm, crackled with authority. "Royal standards are not for sale," she declared, looking around the room. "Nor are they transferable via wire transfer. To demand funds under the guise of duty, while openly rejecting that very duty, is not only paradoxical, it is opportunistic." The room fell silent. This was the Anne doctrine in full effect. "No work, no pay, no service, no status," she continued, delivering the line that has since been whispered through the corridors of power. "We are guardians of a legacy, not underwriters of entitlement." Sources say that even Queen Camilla, who has typically been more sympathetic to Harry's plight in the past, was visibly impressed by the sheer force of Anne's stance. The message was clear. The days of half in, half out were over. Meghan wasn't just asking for money. She was asking the monarchy to fund a lifestyle that actively competes with the monarchy itself. Anne's rejection triggered a wider constitutional debate that is now bubbling in the UK press. The question is being asked, should royal titles automatically come with financial responsibility, or are they symbolic only, especially when wielded by those living thousands of miles away pursuing commercial deals? As the controversy grows, one thing is crystal clear. Meghan expected quiet compliance, hoping the king would pay to avoid a scandal. Instead, she poked the bear. She awoke a royal doctrine that may now spell the end of the Sussexes' residual leverage within the institution. But if you think a private rejection was the end of it, you are wrong, because the palace was about to take this fight public. If Meghan thought her invoice would be handled with the usual discreet murmurs of the palace machinery, she made a fatal miscalculation. The royal counterstrike, when it finally arrived, was not just swift, it was searing. On the morning of December 6, 2025, the atmosphere at Buckingham Palace was electric. The press office summoned a tightly restricted gathering of senior correspondents to the East Gallery. This was not a standard press junket. Cameras were banned. Electronic devices were collected at the door. The mood was less like a briefing and more like a court-martial. At precisely 10 a.m., the heavy oak doors swung open. Princess Anne walked in. She was clad in a tailored navy suit, adorned with a single, significant accessory, a silver brooch from Queen Elizabeth II's personal collection. The message was subtle, but screamingly loud. She was not just speaking for herself, she was speaking with the authority of the matriarch. She held no prepared script, no PR-approved press release. In her hand was only a small, worn leather notebook. She stood behind the podium, scanned the room with a gaze that could freeze water, and began. Her tone was measured, but beneath the calm surface, there was a volcanic tension. "We are witnessing," Anne began, her voice cutting through the silence, "a calculated attempt to convert royal legacy into private profit. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a deliberate act." The room froze. She did not name Meghan Markle directly. She didn't have to. The inference was unmistakable. But Anne wasn't there just to scold. She was there to legislate. For the first time in history, she unveiled a previously confidential framework known as the Royal Education Code. This internal guideline, Anne explained, outlines exactly what qualifies a royal child to receive education funding from the sovereign grant. She began to list the prerequisites, checking them off one by one, each tick marking a failure on the Sussexes' part. Residence in the United Kingdom. Active participation in official royal functions by the custodial parents. Observance of royal dress code and ceremonial protocol. A formal pledge to uphold the privacy and safety standards required of royal minors. None of these standards, Anne declared, closing the notebook with a snap, have been met or even respected by the individuals now making financial demands of the crown. Then came the moment that would dominate headlines for days. The princess paused, opened her notebook again to a marked page, and looked up. Let me quote the original draft of this code, written in the late Queen's own hand. The room held its breath. Titles may be inherited, Anne read slowly, but honor must be earned. With those 10 words, she didn't just deny a payment. She invalidated the entire moral basis of Meghan's demand. But Anne wasn't finished. She was about to reveal the specific details of the invoice that Meghan had fought so hard to keep private, yet paid. The numbers were about to be read aloud, and the sheer audacity of them would turn the British public's confusion into absolute fury. The silence in the East Gallery was absolute. Princess Anne did not raise her voice. She didn't have to. The numbers she was about to read spoke louder than any shout. She adjusted her glasses, looked down at the leather notebook, and began to dismantle the invoice line by line. The total immediate demand, Anne announced, stands at £5 million, just over 10.7 million US dollars, with a projected lifetime cost rising to 12.8 million over the next decade. Let us look at what royal compatibility costs in Montecito. She began to read the breakdown, her voice dripping with icy precision. Item 1. £2.4 million earmarked for elite private education in a hybrid program between California and London. Item 2. £1.8 million for international travel, private security logistics, and educational cultural immersions. Item 3. A staggering £3 million for bespoke tutors. This wasn't just math and science. The list included specialists in arts, etiquette, media training, and diplomacy. The journalists in the room exchanged bewildered glances. Media training for toddlers? But Anne was not done. She turned the page, and her expression darkened. Item 4, she read, pausing for effect. £1.3 million for reputation management and psychological support services to offset royal media trauma. A gasp fluttered through the press corps. Anne looked up, her eyes narrowing. Therapy, she clarified, her voice sharp as a blade. Billed to the crown for harm caused by choices made entirely outside of it. It was a line that would be printed on every front page the next morning. The audacity was breathtaking. Meghan wasn't just asking for tuition. She was asking the monarchy to pay for the trauma of her decision to leave the monarchy. It was a paradox so twisted that Anne simply called it implied blackmail disguised as law. But the financial demands were only half the horror. What came next turned the room's shock into genuine alarm. Anne revealed that Meghan's legal brief had attached a public-facing educational profile for Archie and Lilibet. This appendix included the names of their intended schools, detailed psychological assessments, and even specific future travel dates. Royal security teams were horrified, Anne stated, her tone shifting from anger to grave concern. The palace has spent the last 48 hours scrambling to delete or bury this exposed data. To use one's children as collateral against the crown's dignity and purse is beyond inappropriate. It is dangerous. This was the turning point of the briefing. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about safety. Meghan, in her desperation to prove a point and secure a payout, had effectively doxed her own children to the very institution she claimed failed to protect them. Privacy, Anne continued, leaning forward over the podium, is not just a preference, Madame. It is a royal standard. It is a shield. It is a duty. The room sensed a shift. Anne had finished dissecting the villain of the story. Now, she was ready to introduce the hero. She closed the section on the Sussexes and prepared to draw the ultimate comparison, one that would hurt Meghan more than any financial rejection ever could. She was about to invoke the name of the Princess of Wales. Having dismantled the financial absurdity of the Sussex demands, Princess Anne prepared to deliver the final and perhaps most painful blow. She didn't use insults. She didn't use legal jargon. She used a mirror. She forced the room, and by extension, Meghan Markle, to look at what actual royal parenting looks like. Anne shifted gears, her voice softening but carrying an even heavier weight of authority. She invoked the name of the one royal whose conduct has become the gold standard of the modern monarchy, the Princess of Wales. "Look to Catherine," Anne said, her eyes sweeping the room. "Her 3 children are being raised within the framework of royal service, respect, and academic rigor. But let us be clear about what that costs." Anne opened the notebook to a new page, contrasting the invoice she had just read with the reality of the Wales family. "Prince George will one day inherit not just a crown, but a culture," Anne stated firmly. "Princess Charlotte is mastering 4 languages. Prince Louis attends behavioral protocol seminars. They do this not because it looks good in the press, and certainly not because we pay them to avoid trauma. They do it because it prepares them for a life they did not choose, but must serve." The comparison was brutal in its simplicity. On one side, you had a demand for $12.8 million to create a royal-compatible life in California. On the other side, you had the actual heirs to the throne, living a life of discipline without a price tag attached to their values. Anne's voice did not rise, but her conviction filled the East Gallery. "This is what royal education looks like," she declared. "It is not a perk. It is a discipline. It is not a transaction. It is a transformation." Then came the moment that would be replayed on news cycles for weeks. Anne stepped away from the lectern, looking toward the ancient tapestries hanging on the palace walls, then back at the press. "Royal standards are forged in dignity, discipline, and the quiet reverence of tradition," she said, her voice sharpening like a diamond cutter. "Meghan Markle possesses none of these, and until she does, she would be wise to ask less of the crown and more of herself." A gasp fluttered through the press corps. It was the most direct, withering public takedown of a family member in modern royal history. Anne began to close her leather notebook. She paused for one final second, delivering the line that effectively dismissed the entire 12-page lawsuit as a joke. "She calls this an injustice," Anne said, a dry, cold smile touching her lips. "I call it comedy." And with that, the Princess Royal turned and walked out of the East Gallery. The heavy doors slammed shut, leaving a room full of journalists in stunned silence. But outside the palace walls, the leaking of this briefing was about to ignite a firestorm. Meghan's team wasn't just going to take this lying down. They were preparing to leak their own documents files that would prove just how calculated this invoice really was. If Princess Anne's briefing was a surgical strike, Meghan Markle's response was a carpet bomb. She did not issue a denial. She did not retreat. Instead, just 48 hours after Anne walked out of the East Gallery, the British press was flooded with a new wave of information this time, seemingly leaking directly from the Sussex camp in California. On the morning of December 8th, the Telegraph published a cache of internal documents described as a royal education compensation proposal. These were not forged. They were drafts. They were the blueprints of the negotiation Meghan had hoped to keep secret. But by leaking them now, her team attempted to spin the narrative. Look at how detailed, how professional, how necessary these costs are. But the leak backfired, spectacularly. Instead of eliciting sympathy for a mother fighting for her children's future, the documents revealed a level of calculation that bordered on the grotesque. The 12-page proposal didn't just list school fees. It listed brand opportunities. Let's look at the specific line items that made palace insiders choke on their morning tea. Deep within the proposal was a request for £1.2 million for public relations integrity training. Another line item allocated £800,000 for court presentation and cultural tradition education. But the smoking gun, the detail that stripped away any pretense of privacy, was found on page 9. Meghan's team had included a budget for brand alignment consultancy. What does that mean? The notes clarified it. Preparing the children for coming-of-age interviews and ensuring their educational milestones aligned with future multimedia ventures. This was the moment the mask fell, a royal historian noted. You do not hire brand consultants for primary school children unless you intend to sell them. The Royal Controller's Office issued a rare, detailed rebuttal immediately. They noted, with icy dryness, that royal educational provisions have never been calculated on the basis of brand positioning or potential monetization. But the leak contained one final, explosive detail that would force the future king to intervene. The documents showed that Meghan's communications team had explored trademarking variations of the children's names, Princess Lilibet of Sussex and Prince Archie Windsor, for a proposed multimedia venture titled Legacy Reclaimed. Though the trademarks were never formally filed, the intent was written in black and white. Meghan wasn't just asking the king to pay for school. She was asking him to subsidize the R&D for her next product launch. She was attempting to franchise the bloodline. The reaction in London was visceral. The firewall between the monarchy and the market had not just been breached, it had been dynamited. And for one man, this was no longer a matter of bureaucracy. It was a matter of honor. Prince William, who had remained largely silent to protect his brother, now realized that silence was no longer an option. The heir to the throne was about to step out of his father's shadow and draw a line that could never be crossed again. For years, Prince William has adhered to the family motto, never complain, never explain. He has watched from the sidelines as his brother and sister-in-law launched docu-series, published memoirs, and gave tell-all interviews. He remained silent through the accusations of physical fights and unconscious bias. But the moment Meghan Markle attempted to trademark the royal lineage for a commercial venture, the Prince of Wales decided that silence was no longer dignity. It was complicity. According to sources close to Kensington Palace, on the evening of December 13th, William requested an urgent private audience with King Charles. This was not a father-son chat. It was a meeting between the monarch and his heir. Insiders report that William's message to the king was blunt. He reportedly warned his father that the continued passive tolerance of the Sussex strategy was corroding the monarchy's moral authority. We cannot claim to serve the people, William reportedly argued, if we allow the crown to be treated as a venture capital firm. King Charles, who has long been torn between his love for his son and his duty to the institution, was hesitant to strip his grandchildren of their titles. But the optics had shifted. After Princess Anne's public rebuke and the leak of the brand alignment proposal, the king realized that to do nothing would look weak, and so the William intervention began. In a move characterized by military precision, William authorized the immediate publication of a previously internal policy document titled The Royal Succession and Title Ethics Review, Winter 2025. While heavily redacted for public release, the document's core message was a direct missile aimed at Montecito. It reaffirmed a brutal truth. Titles granted to royal children do not confer or guarantee financial entitlements or educational subsidies unless explicitly formalized by Crown edict or parliamentary provision. The timing of this release was no accident. It was masterclass strategy. The document was made public just 12 hours before Meghan's legal representatives were scheduled to submit a formal petition to the Home Office regarding security funding. William had effectively cut the legs off their legal argument before they even walked into the courtroom. By releasing this policy, William signaled a new era. The soft approach of the early Carolean reign was over. The Prince of Wales was asserting his authority, drawing a hard boundary that said, you can have the titles, you can have the fame, but you cannot have the taxpayers' money to fund it. But just as the palace thought they had regained control of the narrative, the situation took a darker, more personal turn. As William's policy hit the press, a private audio recording, one that Meghan never intended the world to hear, began to circulate in the darkest corners of the internet. And what she said in that recording would strip away the last shreds of public sympathy. Just when the public thought the drama had reached its peak with the trademark scandal, the narrative took a turn into something far darker. It wasn't a letter, and it wasn't a document. It was a voice. On the morning of December 14th, a private audio message, allegedly dated from September 2025, began circulating on encrypted channels before hitting the mainstream press. It was a voice note from Meghan Markle, intended for a private associate. But now, it was being played on every news station from London to Sydney. The voice was unmistakable. It wasn't the soft, polished tone used in her podcasts. It was sharp, angry, and laced with a cold determination. The audio played, "If the monarchy won't help raise my children the way they helped raise William's, then I will make sure the world sees their double standards. I am done asking." The implication was crystal clear. This wasn't a plea for help. It was a threat. Meghan viewed the royal legacy not as a duty-bound heritage, but as a platform to be leveraged, and if she didn't get the payout, she would burn the platform down. The audio confirmed what palace insiders had feared for years. The victimhood narrative was actually a weaponized strategy. The reaction from Buckingham Palace was swift and coordinated, moving with a speed rarely seen in the ancient institution. The Lord Chamberlain's office issued an immediate internal memo, which was accidentally seen by the press. It described any attempts to publicize or monetize royal minors as a breach of dignity, welfare, and institutional precedent. But the real response didn't come from a memo. It came, once again, from the Princess Royal. Later that same day, Princess Anne was attending a routine public charity event in Manchester. Usually, she ignores questions about family drama, but today, when a bold reporter shouted a question about the leaked audio, Anne stopped. She turned, faced the cameras, and delivered a line that instantly went viral. "Royal service," Anne said, her voice cutting through the wind, "is not a vending machine. You don't get titles and benefits just because you insert PR tokens." It was a curt, withering, and absolutely devastating reply. In one sentence, she reduced Meghan's entire campaign to a cheap transaction. The vending machine, quote, trended on social media within minutes, becoming the defining metaphor of the scandal. However, while Anne was fighting the battle on the front lines with sharp words, another royal was fighting a different kind of war. A war of silence, a war of substance. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had remained publicly mute throughout the entire week of leaks and threats. But as the world was about to find out, her silence was not weakness. She was busy preparing a masterclass in soft power that would render Meghan's demands irrelevant. While Montecito was fighting a war of leaks, audio threats, and invoices, the Princess of Wales was fighting a war of relevance. And she chose a battlefield where Meghan could not compete. On December 14th, while Meghan's Royal Mother's Plea special was trending for all the wrong reasons, Princess Catherine appeared at the Vatican. She was not there to talk about titles. She was not there to discuss security budgets. She was there to accept a global mandate. Flanked by religious leaders from multiple faiths, including Pope Leo XIV, Catherine stood beneath the frescoes of the Sistine Chapel. She wore a simple white dress, a color symbolizing peace and purity, stripping away the flashy jewels often associated with royalty. The purpose of her visit was to accept the role of UN honorary patron for children in conflict zones. It was a masterstroke of diplomatic theater. While Meghan was arguing about who pays for Archie's private school security in a gated community, Catherine was standing in solidarity with children in Gaza, Sudan, and Ukraine who had no schools left standing. When she stepped to the microphone, the world stopped to listen. She didn't mention her sister-in-law. She didn't mention the $12 million demand. She didn't need to. Her speech was a guided missile aimed at the very heart of the Sussex narrative, without ever saying their names. "True legacy," Catherine said, her voice echoing in the sacred hall, "is not what we inherit, it is what we empower others to become." She continued, delivering a line that royal historians immediately recognized as the new defining ethos of the monarchy. "In the name of every child displaced by war, abandoned by systems, or denied education due to status or geography, I dedicate my voice. We do not measure a child's worth by their title, but by their spirit." The contrast was blinding. Meghan was fighting for royal equity for two privileged children in California. Catherine was fighting for survival for millions of children in war zones. CNN opened their Christmas programming with her speech. The BBC paused its traditional schedule to highlight the quiet power of the future queen. Even Le Monde in France ran the headline, "Catherine of Peace, the People's Queen, steps beyond the crown." Back in California, the silence was deafening. Sources close to Montecito claimed Meghan was devastated that her holiday broadcast was being ignored in favor of Catherine's PR machine. But insiders knew the truth. It wasn't a PR machine, it was gravitas. Meghan had miscalculated the mood of the world. She framed her struggle around fairness for the 1%. Catherine framed her struggle around service for the forgotten. It was no longer a debate about who was right or wrong. It was a demonstration of who was royal and who was merely famous. As the images of Catherine holding hands with war survivors beamed across the globe, the palace prepared to fire the final cannon. The king, empowered by the public's overwhelming support for Catherine, was ready to issue the decree that would formally close the checkbook forever. The time for debate was over. The time for leaks, invoices, and audio threats had passed. Empowered by the overwhelming public support for Princess Anne's iron doctrine and Princess Catherine's silent power, King Charles III made his move. On the morning of December 28th, just before the new year, Buckingham Palace issued a final year-end notice. It was not a press release. It was a decree, marked with the royal cipher and the stamp of the Court of Street. James's. The document was brief, brutal, and legally binding. The statement, co-signed by the King, Queen Camilla, and the Prince and Princess of Wales, read, "By decree of His Majesty the King, and with the assent of the Privy Council, no financial or educational claim shall henceforth be honored from any family member not residing under the Crown's official protection, nor engaged in royal service." It continued with a sentence that will likely be studied in history books as the moment the Sussex era officially ended. The sovereign duty of the Crown is to its people, not to private claims of grievance, inheritance, or entitlement. Let it be known, the House of Windsor does not respond to ultimatums, nor does it commercialize its descendants. The message was absolute. Meghan and Harry were now entirely cut off symbolically, financially, and institutionally. The half-in, half-out door was not just closed, it was bricked up. Back in Montecito, sources reported a stunned silence. There were no more leaks, no more sources close to the couple. The king had called their bluff, and they had nothing left to play. But the monarchy did not end on a note of anger. It ended on a note of hope. On New Year's Eve, the palace released one final photograph to mark the end of a turbulent year. It was not a staged studio portrait. It was a candid shot taken outside St. George's Chapel after a private prayer service. It showed William and Catherine walking out into the winter sunlight, holding hands with Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. They weren't looking at the cameras, they were looking at each other. They looked united, calm, and unbreakable. But eagle-eyed royal watchers noticed a small, poignant detail. In Princess Charlotte's hand, she clutched a small notebook just like her great-aunt Anne. On the cover, in childish but firm handwriting, were 3 words, "Service is strength." The message was clear. The invoice had been rejected. The blackmail had failed. And the monarchy, battered but unbowed, marched on. Meghan Markle wanted the world to see her value. In the end, the world saw exactly what she was worth to the crown. Nothing.